Welcome everybody. We're starting right on the dot at 12 o'clock for this Orlo hosted webinar about empowering residents' voices and evidence-based decision making. So we'll kind of just quickly run through, I hope, what you're expecting to hear over the next hour, and then get into the detail with my colleagues on the call here. So here are our speakers. So I'm Michael Stringer. I'm the Assistant Director of Communications and Engagement at Surrey County Council. I'm also the National Secretary of LG Comms, one of Orlo's partners, helping to develop the sector of comms engagement across the public sector. And we're joined here by the key speakers. So my colleague Catherine Shipton here at Surrey, who's the Head of Resident Insight, and Abigail Linyard-Tuff, who's the Strategic Lead for Research here at Surrey, and also Becky Price, who's Customer Success Manager, at Orlo. So a little bit of housekeeping about what to expect today. The session will run for approximately 60 minutes. I'm told it doesn't matter if we go a little bit over, but we'll try and keep it to a hard stop at 1 o'clock. We want to keep the webinar fairly conversational, informal, and tailor the content to your needs as the audience. So please do ask questions as we go through using the Q&A box. We will get to those questions. We've got a good substantial amount of time at the end to get to those questions to run through. So please kind of fill that up as we're talking and we'll get to them. Any questions that we don't manage to answer at the end, we'll pick up afterwards directly. And just to note, the session is being recorded and we'll ensure the slides and recording are available to all attendees after the session. So if you need to drop off early for any reason, then you can catch up later. That's not a problem. So these are what we're going to get into around the discussion areas today. So we're going to talk you through the creation and the journey of our resident intelligence unit here in Surrey, the role of research in decision making to provide a clear direction and mitigate against risks, building a strong evidence base and ensuring that decisions are rooted in facts. And also some examples from across the Orlo customer base, other than just Surrey, on understanding the wants and needs of citizens. I hope you will find that really useful, and there'll be a chance at the end as well to ask Orlo to kind of contact you and talk more in depth about kind of your strategy, where you're working around any of the things that you've heard today. So I hope that's what you're expecting. We'll get into the kind of the bulk of the webinar now. And as I say, please just ask questions in the chat box as we go, and we'll get to them at the end. So here in Surrey, we have set up a resident intelligence unit. Sounds very grand, but I'll just take a few minutes to set the scene of what we're currently doing here and how we're using research and insight for evidence-based decision making, not just in our comms team, but also to help the whole organisation in terms of that policy development. So around 2 or 3 years ago, as we were kind of coming out of the worst of the pandemic, it felt like instead of breathing a sigh of relief, the comms team were faced with a huge increase in pace and volume of work, often driven by knotty or kind of hyper-localised issues. I think during the pandemic, we, as comms teams up and down the country, we kind of really increased the knowledge of comms and what it can do, but that kind of was a great thing, but it brought with it a lot of expectations following the pandemic. We were having to deal continuously with what we were referring to as mini fires, where we're often pushed into a reactive space by a minority or even individual loud local voices. This was likely down to a variety of factors, like the state of the nation, cost of living crisis, decreasing trust in politicians and the political system, which all had an impact on resident trust, really, and confidence in the organisation, in politicians and the public sector. But it was distorting our focus that should really be for the majority of our residents, or indeed those quieter voices who are in most need. We simply weren't able to properly plan our comms around the majority of what residents actually cared about or had an interest in. And my main concern about this was the impact this was having on our relationship with our residents as an organisation. So we knew we had to do something. It wasn't kind of all down to comms, but we felt like we could work proactively within the organisation to address some of this issue. So we knew we had to better understand our residents first off. As an organisation and as council kind of up and down the country, we hold huge amounts of data, lots of different sets of data and insights about our residents, what they think about certain issues, but it was really disparate and not brought together or reported effectively across the council. It was kind of done in silos for very specific reasons. We also knew we needed to prevent small issues from escalating, get a grip of complaints or misinformation spreading across social media in particular. But we didn't have resource to monitor and identify those issues or act to prevent them escalating. So we didn't, in our comms team in Surrey, have the resource to have two-way conversations on social media, for instance, when we saw things that were kind of coming up. We needed to give decision makers perspective. So the ease to which members and senior leaders in the organisation are reached directly on social media or through emails or on the doorstep when it comes to members leads to certain voices becoming distorted as the view of all residents without a representative view being given, and perhaps a silent majority being ignored. And this was particularly true around consultations. I'm sure that rings true to other communicators in the public sector. We knew also we needed to better engage strategically with our residents. So there are hundreds of people across different services and directorates that are engaging with residents in various ways, but there was no overall Surrey County Council strategy around this engagement, no oversight or forward plan, no agreed professional framework for engagement. So in other words, no consistent messaging and duplication, and led to a lot of confusion for residents about who was talking to them about what and why we were going to talk to similar groups of residents, 1 week to the next about different things. And so we wanted to help our services and our policies meet the customer expectations by giving them the right insight. The vision of what we're doing at Surrey is to put residents' voices at the centre of everything we do, and our vision goes beyond just using insight for effective communication, but ensuring it's used for service delivery and service design. So our focus now at Surrey is to start to communicate our trustworthiness by talking to our residents about what research has told us that they are most dissatisfied or indeed satisfied with. So we're sharing campaigns and content where we're competent to build on that satisfaction and increase that trust in the organisation. And on areas they're dissatisfied with, we're being honest and sharing our intent and what we're doing about it. So the RIU, the Resident Intelligence Unit, here was set up to provide a central function to collect, interpret and report resident insights and intelligence, and 2, to guide, support and track the engagement and consultation activity across the entire organisation. It was set up to be the first port of call for any service who needs or wants to engage with residents in any way, and to coordinate engagement activity more effectively by improving our understanding of residents and avoiding confusion for our residents by making resident interactions much more effective. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine, who was brought in to lead the RIU in January of this year, and to talk through in more detail about how we've set up the unit and how we're empowering resident voices and encouraging evidence-based decision making, which we're confident will set up the organisation and steer us through some challenging times and build relationships with our audiences. So over to Catherine.
Thank you, Mike. So I'm obviously Catherine. I'm the head of the new unit, the Resident Intelligence Unit. And it goes without saying that I'm delighted to have joined the team that is so focused on experiences of residents and really, making sure that we're learning from and listening to them. My background before I joined in January, as Mike said, I worked at Ipsos or Ipsos Mori. I focused on customer experience research there, but a lot also on kind of thought leadership generation and trends and foresights, which, is really something I'm trying to bring to the team. But the unit itself, so we've been in place for a grand 10 months. And before we deep dive into some of the specific research work, I wanted to give just a bit more detail about what we're focusing on strategically. So the RAU has been set up as a central function for resident insight and intelligence within the council. And really what we're trying to do is make sure that all of the information and insight that we do know about our residents is front and centre in decision making and policy. Our key tools, and you'll see these on the slide at the top, are the work streams of behaviour change, research and consultation and engagement. And what we are here for as a central core function team is to make sure that we are there to support all of the services and project teams in developing the right approach for engaging with residents and making sure that they've got the tools they need before starting anything, and using the existing knowledge, context and insight that we have to hand. We're focused on getting this into their hands so they can actually do something about it. We know that isn't what we're there to do. We need to make sure that we get this evidence to the people that can actually do something about it. And as you can see on screen, we've started and will continue to focus on a number of tools to do that. And I'll talk through a number of these as we move through the webinar. But really, I suppose, what we're trying to do is maximise value to the council in a number of ways. And really that's about uplifting opportunities to knowledge share and taking information out of silos, making sure we're evaluating existing engagements for the outcomes. So we're doing more of what works and we're not doing what doesn't. Making sure that we, where possible, are realising efficiencies by taking a centralised approach. Informing and sharing learning from transformation and customer journey work, which is a big priority for the organisation as a whole, and ultimately ensuring a more coherent experience for our residents themselves. Oh, sorry, I'm just struggling to push onto the next slide. Here we go. There we go. So we really are an internal consultancy that works to 4 key principles of how we support the organisation. So first up is, without doubt, being evidence-led. What we're trying to do is elevate up insights out of silos to make sure that we're supporting strategic decision-making. Making sure, and I'll keep saying this, that our insights are representative. And this is really important from the kind of context that Mike gave us up front, and about not making sure that we're not amplifying the loudest voices that are already there, but making sure that we're getting a really good read of what all of our residents want. And then really making sure that we're using frameworks, and in particular behaviour change frameworks, to tackle ongoing challenges and create impactful change. What we're trying to do as a core function is really have this one council mentality. And I'll talk about this more a little bit at the end, but we are setting up a unified way of working in terms of the way that we are engaging with residents. And this really means championing and collaboratively working to make sure that our residents are front and centre and that we have a consistent approach to engaging with them. We have hundreds, literally hundreds of customer journeys, and we don't want to add to the different experiences that they're having by adding on a load of different engagement approaches as well. Thirdly, it's really focusing on building public trust, making sure that we're engaging in the right way with different audiences, engaging on the topics that matter most to them, not what matter most to us, and creating and supporting a feedback loop with our residents that strengthens public confidence. Now, all of these things are much easier said than done, but we're making sure that they are continually embedded throughout all of our strategic approach. And then finally, of course, about creating efficiencies. So what we're trying to do is mitigate against any risks, maximising the resource that we have to tackle them, and empowering and supporting teams through a centralised practitioner-led approach, which is us, to make sure that they have the skills and experience that they need. Our role has a core function, and this really allows us to take a bird's eye view on what is happening across the council in terms of intelligence, research, data, the list goes on, and to really make sure that we can elevate that so that it's appropriate and visible to our leaders and strategic decision makers. So now I've got here, and this might look like a bit of an overwhelming slide, and you're probably just thinking, okay, you're talking a lot about what you're trying to do, but what insight do you actually have? And it's a fair question. So on screen, we've got a number of different sources that we're pulling on from across the organisation. In terms of resident insight in particular, they're the kind of core ones that are along the top. So we have a quarterly resident telephone survey, which surveys about 1,150 residents a quarter. And that's something that we've run now for 8 quarters in the form that it currently is in. So we're getting some really good trend data. We are in the process of setting up a customer panel that is starting with 1,000 residents and will ladder up to 2,000. We're hoping to get our first wave of data out, of polls out next week. So we're going to have our first feedback by Christmas, which is very exciting. We've also got a YouGov polling subscription, which we pull on to really enable us to benchmark as a county against national sentiment. And of course, it goes without saying that we are utilising all those social media analysis insights package that has been incredibly valuable. And even in the kind of 4 months that we've really built out this capability, it's really added a huge amount. So what we do, and I've really focused on those 4 because of the resident insight perspective, but what we're doing is reporting back at an aggregate level all of these sources together to try to contextualise the challenges that the organisation is facing. As you can probably imagine, it's a complete iterative process, and we know that probably in a year's time, what we're reporting will look quite different to what we are now, but we must start as we mean to go on, and we'll evolve it dependent on the need. At the moment, we are circulating a monthly social media listening analysis report, as well as a monthly resident insight roundup. We also, on a quarterly basis, report back our resident survey satisfaction from the telephone survey. And a really exciting progression that we've made is we're feeding in key insights to a customer dashboard, which is held centrally by our customer team. And just some of the sources that we're feeding into that are resident satisfaction data from the surveys above, as well as things like customer service inquiry data, as well as social listening. And this really helps us to give a bigger picture, I suppose, of the landscape within which we're operating. And Abby will kind of give a good example of how, pulling all those different sources together gives us something much more meaningful than each of them individually. I suppose it's just worth pointing out, so all of this is alongside, of course, individual project support to ensure that officers are using the insight and sentiment data that we have in the organisation to support what they're doing, and so they can use it as evidence upon which to test hypothesis and do new design and implementation work. We've got a number of research tools available to us at the moment, which is really good. We do want to consolidate ultimately, but they all do a different job for us at the moment. So we have Surrey Says, which is our front end of Delib. We are using Commonplace, which has been excellent for external resident consultation and engagement. And we also have a more bespoke research survey to allow us to script more complicated research programs. So that's enough of me. I'm going to hand over now to Abigail, who is in my team, and she's leading on this on the research from the Surrey County Council perspective, and will talk us through an applied example.
Thank you very much, Catherine. My role today is to kind of bring you into what we're actually doing in our kind of day-to-day lives at the council. So, as many other local authorities are facing, and kind of other organisations across the country and perhaps even the world, the big questions we're always being asked is, what matters to the people we serve? What are their priorities? What are their concerns? And then what should we be doing about it? So initially, we've been kind of thinking about how we bring together this kind of rich data world that we as researchers, as analysts, kind of live and exist in and kind of enjoy being in, because we know that that is not for everyone. And today I'm going to talk about how we kind of bring these together in a really comprehensive way and contextualize them for those people that aren't our most data literate peers. And I'm going to use an example that I imagine many people in this room are familiar with, whether that's through your personal lives or through your kind of professional lives, and that is roads. Most people touch a road in their life, and we know that most local authorities are always being asked about improving, maintaining, and developing our road systems. So we begin with our kind of 3 data sources that kind of Catherine's kind of given you a bit of a brief on. So we have our kind of complaints data, that kind of tells us what people are coming to us with their problems are. Then we kind of contextualize that through our resident survey, kind of getting that more representative voice. And then we're also looking at social media to kind of see how this is kind of being looked at in that kind of broader kind of contextual space that we're all existing in. So when it comes to road maintenance in our kind of complaints data, so we know that consistently it is our top category that comes in with kind of concerns and inquiries. And last year we averaged about 8,000 a month inquiries around our kind of road network. So this really is showing us that it's something people care about. It's something people are coming to us as something they want looked at. Then in our kind of more kind of representative survey, again, road and pavement maintenance are coming up as services that people are unsatisfied with, kind of spaces that people think that we should and could be improving in. And lastly, when we start looking at social media, again, kind of it's coming up within our kind of top 3 themes in September, with kind of poor road and pavement maintenance being pulled up 37 times by our general public. However, this is where we as researchers and analysts come in, and we kind of support our leaders to kind of have an understanding of what does this all mean in our big picture. So firstly, we kind of look at the complaints and we're like, well, actually, roads are offered as a universal service. Like I said, most people have been and interacted with your local roads in the past week, let alone the past day, and many even within the past hour, you have been near or on a road. But also we are encountering them frequently. So when earlier this year, we did a YouGov survey and asked people what services they had used. 86% of Surrey residents suggested that they had interacted with Surrey roads in the last 6 months. We imagine that maybe it might be a few more than that, recognising that we also do have part of the population that may not be interacting with our roads regularly for kind of disability or other kind of limitations on their lives. But we do imagine that it's probably more than only 86%. But even when we compare that to kind of our other universal services that we provide as an organisation, such as libraries, we only have about 36% of people reportedly using that. So it's not only a universal service, but it's one that is also used universally. We also look at that kind of issue with frequency, and we look at kind of behavioural psychology, and we look in the academic resource around this, which really looks at kind of how our kind of frequency and regularity of engagement with a problem, a topic, an area really kind of encourages us to perceive it as more important. This is a behavioural psychology thing that most marketeers use all your lives. The more times you see an advert for something, the more likely you are to buy it, to think it's more important in your life. But this happens the other way around as well. The more interactions you have with a certain aspect of service, the more likely you are to kind of see that as a big issue in your personal life. Now we go on to that residents survey, which we kind of look at it as really kind of much stronger, more representative data, more reliable data. in its kind of proportionality. And actually, when we look at that, yes, it is the area that people are most dissatisfied in Surrey, but when we put it in a national context, it's actually not that bad. And satisfaction with our roads is twice as high, actually, than the national satisfaction level. So actually, people in Surrey are actually happier with our roads than we are than nationally is the issue, which perhaps can help reassure our kind of strategic leaders that yes, it's something we should be thinking about, but it's not as bad as some other places might be. And lastly, when we're looking at that social media, we recognise that it's in our top 3 teams, but actually we can also see that there are other topics that are perhaps driven by local news or local activity that kind of provide these bigger spikes of kind of media awareness. So, for example, in the same month in which there were 37 messages criticising our roads and pavements, we had another topic that had over 10,000 comments. So it just kind of helps put these kind of themes that are perhaps, like Catherine said, something that are very kind of top of mind for us as service providers. We can kind of see in that kind of media space, they're quieter than some of these kind of big issues that people are perhaps facing in their lives in a particular moment. We're also looking at how we kind of contextualize such a local kind of service-driven issue with these kind of bigger state of the nation problems that people care about, these kind of bigger, more meatier kind of issues that people care about outside of themselves, that aren't about someone's perhaps daily interactions with the road outside their house. And when we look at that from YouGov in September, we can see that actually roads and road maintenance isn't on that list. That is not what people worry about in a big state of the nation part of our lives. People are more concerned about healthcare and the NHS, or criminal justice, or climate change, and that broader environmental policy piece. So through all of this, we're able to kind of contextualize what perhaps in one moment feels like such an important critique that the council is being kind of pushed by our residents into this kind of larger, bigger picture, where actually perhaps, although it's important and a big part of what we offer, we should also be thinking about how we're supporting some of these other things. And we can use this information to kind of remind people that we are doing kind of work within these bigger state of the nation pieces as well. I am now going to hand back to Catherine to talk about what's next.
Thank you, Abby. So really to wrap up our kind of Surrey section, I just wanted to come back to the core mission of the Resident Intelligence Unit and a broader sort of strategic objectives, what we're focusing on over the next year, before I hand over to Becky to talk in a bit more detail through some applied Orlo case studies. So really, and I'm sorry for repeating this, but what we are is a dedicated centralised insight support, and we're really trying to focus on how better we can get our intelligence and research to be shared and coordinated at the kind of proper organisational level. We're really focused, as I said before, in terms of getting in place a unified approach to engaging with residents and to ensure really that every engagement that we do is as meaningful as it possibly can be, really with that goal of making sure that our residents trust us, engage with us, and that we're mitigating any risks that we may be facing. Currently, we have delivered guidance on a one council approach to running consultations specifically, and we will be building out over the next year more content and guidance for other approaches outside of consultation. We also support officers and teams across the council at a project level, equipping them with tools and insights for things like business planning, delivery, policy recommendation, and of course, decision making. It is worth saying, we're not there yet, and we are at a fairly immature state, really. To note, to date, there is data that feeds in, but generally it's fairly operational and one-dimensional in that respect. And what we're trying to do is make sure that the kind of sentiment tools, what our residents really think and feel, is fed in the same way as this more operational data into organisational business planning. So I suppose, just a couple of things about what we're really focusing on in the next year. As I said, it is really this unified ways of working, building out support and guidance across the full suite of resident engagement. That's things like research, events, engagement, and the list goes on. This is really our attempt at a kind of a one-stop shop, I suppose, for our policy teams that we're supporting, to give a more coherent and aggregated view of what activity is going on, and meaning that we are able to design and have a more coherent experience for residents. We will also be evaluating the impact that has had from the uniformed approach to consultation specifically, and building those learnings into the rollout of further engagement materials. And this has a real one council approach to it, learning from what did and didn't work. We'll be focusing continually on delving deeper into resident satisfaction, reputation, public trust, etc., and making sure that we are improving and sharing and strengthening this data so that the teams have the best that they can to hand. And then I just wanted to really flag this at the end, because we're focusing on research. So we are progressing, embedding a behavioural science and research culture throughout the whole organisation, thinking about the end user at hand, and actually really trying to have as much of a preventative impact as we possibly can. And we're really, really lucky to be working with an embedded team within the council that's funded by and this is a mouthful, so bear with me, the National Institute of Health and Care Research, the NIHR, and which has funded the Health Determinants Research Collaboration, so the HDRC. And there is a huge amount of progress and work being done there to make sure that we are living and breathing research in everything that we do. So I really do hope that we and the team can, feedback and let you all know as a community about how we're getting on with that in a few months' time. So enough from me. I will now hand over to Becky.
Thanks, Catherine. And just before I go into my part, I just want to say, obviously, it's clear to see the fab work that you've all been doing. And as obviously, your current customer success manager, it was really exciting when you first came to me about this project. I think the work you've achieved when it's not even been a year is, amazing to see. So just want to say well done before I go on. Hi everyone on the call. Just to introduce myself, so I'm Becky. I'm one of the customer success managers at Orlo. I currently work with our local government customers, so like Surrey. And today I'm just going to be going through a couple of case studies more related to social listening and how we can really utilise that to understand what residents are saying and ultimately build trust within the community. So I'm going to start with Wakefield, and they might be on the call today, so if they are, hello. They started their journey probably about 3 years ago now, and I'm going to be talking about how we've managed to work together and build and boost trust by 30%. So just to kind of set the scene, as I said, when the team first came to us 3 years ago, they were right at the start of their kind of social media management journey. They didn't necessarily have a strategy in place, and that was something that we've worked on over the last 3 years. And I know the team initially went away and started to look at what social accounts do they have, who are on those social channels, and actually are people engaging with them. So after the initial social media audit was conducted, it was clear to see that actually there were different personas on each social media channel. And there was really a way for us to we wanted to see, do we have any clear social media metrics that we can track and measure that effectively? So I know Laura, who I work with closely, and the comms team, they went away and came back to me with some definable outcomes that they wanted to achieve. And I think from the initial research that was done, one of the things that did need improving was sentiment across the resident base in Wakefield, and also the engagement across the accounts was quite low. So another metric that they wanted to focus on was social media engagement. Is the content that they're serving actually reaching the people they want? Is it interesting to what they want to see? And does it actually portray what the council is doing in those areas? So through the use of social media listening, and that was looking at public mentions and also non-direct mentions of the council, really honing in on that analytics side of things as well, and developing those clear personas, we were able to start to track effectively whether the work that they were putting into place was actually making a difference. So one of the specific metrics that we wanted to track was trust, and whether we could put a numerical value behind that. So using some of the data that we could pull in from the Audit platform and working with the team, we used the trust indicator to really set a standard of what it was before they implemented the strategy and how it was after. So actually at the start, the team looked at it per channel and made an aggregate together. And we found out that it was actually sitting at 46%, which isn't bad, but we knew it could be improved. So through the use of, as I said, looking at those comments that are coming in, those non-direct mentions, engagement on the accounts as a whole, and putting that strategy in place, it actually increased to 67%, which is a great shift over that period of time. And I think putting in the strategy in place and really connecting with residents and making them feel listened and heard, it allowed residents to actually want to engage with the council long term as well, so that they could effectively understand what people were saying and actually what change they wanted to implement. Now, as a second stage to that, we also identified there wasn't much harmony necessarily between the comms and the customer service team to actually look at the messages that are coming in. And we realised that maybe some messages were being missed off because it primarily sat with the comms team. Obviously, they have lots of other roles around that. So we thought, as a better approach, it would be good to have that connection with the customer service team to have a unified approach. So again, Laura went away with the other team to work really hard on bringing the customer service team onto Orlo, so that they could have a clear view of what people were saying and making sure that customer queries were solved. And actually, as part of that, we also wanted to look at emotion of those messages coming through. So we tested a theory around, can we change the emotion by bringing on the customer service team? And when we first looked at this, the biggest emotion was actually confusion, which did signify at the time that, maybe not everything was getting responded to and people weren't having their queries solved. Looking at emotion and I suppose confusion as one specific emotion, it is one that could easily be swayed, and just by implementing a simple change such as making sure you're having regular dialogue with people can hopefully shift it in a positive direction. And as we can see here, over time since they've actually implemented that, the highest emotion is gratitude, which is showing that it is working and that people are feeling more confident with having queries resolved and generally better dialogue with the council as well. So it was really great to see that from implementing a strategy and looking at it from both ends, from the social media channels and content to also the direct dialogue with the community, there has been a positive change over time. And just to kind of wrap up on this particular example, so as I mentioned, obviously bringing on the customer service team, it allowed the comms team to really have that joint up approach, and also them not to have to do necessarily everything as well as their other roles, and really utilising social as a customer service channel. Because as we know now, there are so many people on social media across lots of different channels, lots of information coming in, and I think it's only going to grow over time as well. And as I said, that obviously we've seen that 30% increase in trust, but actually that has been increased even more to now 88% since we brought the customer service team on top as well. And not only that, I think the team have worked really hard on the social performance side of things, and post engagement was a metric that they wanted to look at. So I think before the strategy was implemented, this was sat at around 0.5%, and actually now that has increased to 1.93%, which is really good. As we know, on a lot of the social channels at the minute, the algorithms and everything else involved, that content isn't necessarily being displayed as much as it used to. So to still see that increase has been good. But yeah, just kind of going back to obviously what Surrey was presenting as well, I think it's really key to have the research and the data before you implement that strategy as well, and to really understand who is sitting on your social channels, because it's not always going to be the same across each channel. We know that different ages sit on different channels, different demographics as well. So yeah, just going back to what Catherine and Abigail said about the data side of things, I think that is really, really important. And then moving on to a very recent topic that everybody has recently been chatting about, and that is the Labour autumn budget. And I want to do a little bit of work around what we could see from social media around this particular topic. And I think it's really relevant to a lot of the public sector, not just local government. There's been lots of decisions across different departments for budgets, different kind of money coming in and spending as well. So I'm just going to go through a few of the insights that I found over the last couple of weeks since it was obviously televised and since then. So interestingly, we looked at mentions across X and also press and media sources, and we can see there's been an overwhelming number of results even just over the last couple of weeks. And interestingly, actually, we can see here that the results on X are actually higher than press and media sources. Now, I know there's been a lot of question and uncertainty around X as a channel. I know customers of mine are debating whether to stay on the channel or not. And my colleague Rosie's also been doing some really good work within housing, again, understanding whether housing authorities should stay on X. And I do think there's still an untapped audience that you can gather that data from. And I know the work that Catherine and Abigail do as well, they really utilise X as a channel to gather that information. It doesn't necessarily have to still be used for broadcasting. I think for understanding those topics and trends, it is really important. And also interestingly as well, looking at the age breakdown. So we can see that 14 above has come out as the biggest age group in this particular discussion. However, I know across the public sector, trying to engage a younger demographic is a key thing. And it is much harder than particularly other age groups. However, in this particular data set around the autumn budget, it was really interesting when we drilled into the sentiment. So actually for the 18 to 29 group, it was actually more positive. And drilling down into the results, we could see that this was actually positivity around housing opportunities and renting moving forward, and hopefully that being easier for young people to buy their first house or having more and better renters' rights. So yeah, I think that was really interesting, that even though we can see at face value those age groups, having that research and data to really drill down as to see, okay, why is it positive, why is it negative, is key as well. And we also wanted to look at trust around the topic, and at a first glance, obviously we can see that it is overwhelmingly distrusting. But again, I think where I've just mentioned around drilling down into that to see why is that the case, that is really important. Now we can see the trust was actually higher when it first went out. It has declined over time. But then over the last few days, the trust has increased again. And I think that could probably be related to a number of factors. People, when change does happen, it is a lot for people to get their heads around. There might have been other news at the time that have gone out that is also contributing to this digital trust as well. But we can see here, drilling down into one of the specific days, the top result around that was obviously a significant increase in some of the taxes that are coming in as well. But I think, again, trust is a really important one to look at, and to, again, not just look at it for one specific day, but over time as well, because that can fluctuate depending on a lot of things that you see. And I think what Abigail was saying around, what you tend to see more as well will influence you. So you could have been looking at something on a particular day, which again influences how you're going to convey with different people. So I think that was really interesting to see when we did the analysis. And then the last bit around the analysis that I looked at was some of the influences and interests of people who were discussing the budget. We can see the top 4 interests across, this was X in particular, politics and social issues, sports and recreation, education and learning, and environmental and nature, which actually is similar to some of the sectors that Abigail was talking about in the national survey. And I think looking at influences and interests is key, not just for this particular topic, but for social listening as a whole, because it can really help you to understand who is talking about those topics, and actually are they talking about them positively or negatively. I think as wider examples, it's really useful for potentially campaigns that you want to run, and to understand who are those local influencers, could be in your area or wider, that you might want to utilize for campaigns as well. So I think it's got, again, going back to that kind of research and data, really understanding who your audience is before you create your campaign or go out with that messaging as well. Just to kind of round off utilising social listening, I think there's definitely other ways that you can do that, and really looking at the data to benefit from maybe like a comms perspective. So one of them is events. I was recently speaking to another customer, Rhonda Conyon, Taft County Borough Council. I've said it right, hopefully. And they had a really nice use case for this. So they had an event in the local area that been done for 100 years. And one of their worries was maybe potentially having to close roads for the event might cause some negative sentiment coming from residents. But actually, looking at social listening and what people were saying about the event, it actually turned out that the sentiment increased, and that actually wasn't a worry in the end because the event was such a success. So I definitely think looking at that for stuff that you've got going on in the area, making sure residents are engaged and excited about events is really key as well. I think the second one, utilising reporting for senior leadership. Now, I know specifically in some of our reports, but I know across other providers and tech solutions for different forms of information, you can get high-level data to present back. And I think as a senior leader, normally they will just want a high-level overview of those trending themes and topics. So I think making that as simple as possible is key. And then the final one, which I've already touched on a little bit, is for campaigns as well, and doing the research before you put that together. I think a lot of people might have an idea of how people think or what they want to see, but actually putting that data behind that to justify your reasoning, again, is key. I think definitely utilising any data and research super important for long-term gain as well. So that's me.
Okay, thanks, Becky. So we've got some time now for a Q&A, and we've had some questions in the chat. So we've got about 10 minutes, and I'll take some of the questions that are in the chat and kind of direct them at some of our panelists, and obviously feel free to add in any more questions. If we don't get to them over the next few minutes, we'll certainly respond directly to any questions that come in the chat, and we'll share our contact details at the end as well, if any of you would like to discuss this further. So I'm just kind of looking through, and I'm going to kind of lump a couple together and give them to Catherine initially. So Joe Miller and Joanne Quinn have both asked kind of questions about how we work internally with the Resident Intelligence Unit and different teams. So Joe's asked, do we have other teams providing evidence and insight for decision making, like performance or BI teams? And if so, how do we work with them? And Joanne, from more of an engagement point of view, do we have an engagement toolkit and guidance for other teams within the council who are doing some of that work? So Catherine, do you want to kind of initially kick off with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, so on that second one, so absolutely, this is the goal of the Unified Ways of Working framework, ultimately, is for us to create guidance, a toolkit for how teams can go about engaging with residents. We've been really broad in our approach. Almost it makes life a bit difficult for us, I think, but we're trying to bring it almost before we go to a methodological approach and say, what are you trying to achieve from your objective of the engagement? And then hopefully the team can assist, the goal to say what about research, what about consultation, what about it should be an event, etc., rather than almost us trying to predetermine too much what the actual method should be. That being said, I mean, we have had to focus specifically on consultation up front. So that in effect has meant that we've had to predetermine. So it gets a little bit confusing. But ultimately, the vision is that once we've completed this Unified Ways of Working engagement approach, we will have a full toolkit for officers across the organisation to use, and that should signpost them to where we should get involved, or if they have queries or troubleshooting, who to go to within our kind of core central team to assist them. And I mean, particularly when it comes to research, I'm sure Abby will attest to this, we have a lot to give, even it doesn't often have to be too comprehensive. It could just be us reviewing questionnaires up front, and then actually the team can go off and kind of deliver them themselves, be it, it might be them going into the community. We obviously don't need to be involved in all steps, but we could offer something really supportive in terms of that review and guidance up front. And I think that's really where this Unified Ways of Working piece of work is trying to get to. It's involve us up front, and if we need to be involved at the end, but ultimately it's your project. And I suppose in that sense, it's a real kind of like empowering cultural piece as well. So then to go back to the first question from Joe. So absolutely, I mean, this is the thing. We are trying to hub, I suppose, the insight, aggregate it together and make it as meaningful as possible in the round for the team. But we actually quite actively are not the owner of each data set. With that sits with the team. And as you say, we absolutely need to be marrying up operational data, performance data, with things like resident sentiment or the pieces that we're getting from the satisfaction survey. So I think this is a huge, unbelievable piece of work in a sense to map the entire organisation. In bits, I think we're doing better. So as Abby obviously talked to in that kind of roads piece, when it comes to universal services, I think we're doing a better job because ultimately it's easier. We're talking about all residents. I would say we're much more immature when we're talking about sort of targeted services to do with adult social care or children's, because it's much more difficult. Ultimately, surveying a random selection of those users is much more difficult than going out to the general population to ask them. So it's harder. But that being said, we're working with the teams to make sure that they have as comprehensive tools as possible. But anyway, I'll shut up. I feel like I've been going on for ages. Sorry.
Thanks, Catherine. I hope that answers those two questions. Just a quick one from Hannah Clements around the resident satisfaction survey. So I know this is something we've been running in Surrey for a while, but she asks, Is our quarterly resident survey delivered in-house or outsourced? And do we publish the analysis publicly each quarter? You know, Catherine or Abigail. Abigail, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I can come on that. So we do actually externally commission it, but we externally commission it in partnership with our local police. We kind of manage some cost savings in that way. So yes, so we do outsource it, but that's also because it's a telephone survey. So the methodological process we've chosen is in order to kind of get that rigor rather than kind of hearing from those regular voices. So it's kind of quite hard to do a full telephone survey in-house at a local authority, nigh impossible. So I don't think the methodology is necessarily well suited to running in-house. And in terms of publishing the results, so since our redesign, we've been thinking really critically about how we share results in a meaningful way with our residents. So like we've been discussing about making the data not just the raw data for our internal kind of teams that we work with, we're also thinking through how we do the same thing of kind of providing the insight alongside the data for our residents. And we're developing some kind of really interesting tools to hopefully support that kind of external publishing going forward.
Thanks, Abigail. And just coming to one from our old Surrey friend Jay Butcher in the chat here. So he's asking about social media and what our digital estate looks like. So how do we sift the message from residents from the noise of those commenting on an issue that might be outside of Surrey or indeed the UK? And I know this is something that we managed to do in consultations, but when it comes to the social media landscape, it's trickier. And I know this maybe harks back to the discussion or the comment about X, where we find that most of kind of the comments or messages we receive on X tend to be snowballing from a lot of the time people who aren't residents of Surrey, whereas a platform like Facebook tends to be much more kind of community based. But Becky, I don't know from an Orlo point of view whether you have any advice around those different social media channels and kind of managing to sift those comments and input and insights from people who are actually residents, or they're just kind of campaign groups from elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely. I do agree. It's quite hard sometimes, isn't it, to decipher the topic you want to look for and who is actually a resident. I know when I speak to other customers, I know we've worked on it as well. It is good to start broad so that you get all the information in, but I think it's then finding a way to effectively filter that information down. That could be looking at specific keywords or drilling it down by location as well, so that you know that you are speaking to people in the right area. It is sometimes nice to be able to compare it, I think, as well, because one area may be talking about a certain topic, but there might be local authorities that aren't too far away from you where the topics are completely different, but I still think it's good to get that point of view as well.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. I think it's one of those kind of issues that there isn't a clear kind of silver bullet to answer that, but it's that approach where you draw the line in terms of what insight's useful, I suppose, and it might be issue by issue rather than platform by platform. Quite a fundamental one from Rachel Fox earlier on in the chat, that they're recognising that they're data rich but insight poor, and so any tips around improving that? How do you translate all of that kind of data that we have and that we hold into actual meaningful insight? I know we touched on that, but Catherine, do you want to have a go at tackling that one?
Definitely. I mean, I just think this is the killer question, to be honest. I mean, you will all be drowning in data, and it's just, I mean, it actually slightly terrifies me from a climate storage point. Like, why are we storing all of this stuff? I honestly think, and this is probably a little bit blunt, but probably 95% of our data could be deleted. We're not using it. I would say, and this is something that I keep having to remind myself of, is go back to the objective and the hypothesis. Write a hypothesis for what you want to achieve with your insight, and then go from there. So do we have the data that we need to do the analysis, to test the hypothesis? Anything that isn't relevant to your hypothesis, you don't need. And it's a hard one because, I mean, obviously we can't just all go around deleting statutory data. I'm not suggesting that. But to answer each individual insight query, go back to that point, and then you can take it from there. And I think, you know, as us as kind of insight professionals, we need to be constantly going back to our stakeholders and the teams we're working with that as a starter. And almost that is where your profession comes through and your practitioner piece comes through in this area, because ultimately, if somebody gives you a file with a bazillion rows of data and a bazillion different cuts of it, yet you can't find insight from that. And I'm actually, we kind of laugh about it here, but that isn't insight. We call that maybe not even data. Let's just call it stuff. It doesn't have any meaning. So just keep coming back to what we're trying to achieve. Do we have what we need to achieve it? And if the answer is no, how do we collect it? And actually, that's a better place to start than we have this data.
Excellent. Okay, we probably should leave it on that fundamental point in terms of what's data and what's insight. And I know it's a complex topic, but I hope that everybody on the webinar today has found this information useful. So if you want to discuss anything you've heard today, if you'd like to discuss your 2025 strategy with a member of the Orlo team, please type planning in the Q&A box if you haven't already, and they will kind of reach out to you. And please get in touch. So our contact details in terms of the panelists are on the screen now. The slides will be shared and the recording will be shared after this. So don't feel like you have to kind of frantically write that down now, but please feel free to reach out to any of us at Surrey. I'm more than happy to talk through what we're doing and really keen to hear what other people are doing as well. I'm a big advocate of public sector communicators sharing best practice. You know, we're not competing with each other. Let's kind of develop what we're doing together and be the best we can be. So please kind of reach out, get in touch. Anything you've heard today would be happily answer. Also, Rebecca's contact details from Orlo there. And as I say, if you want a conversation with Orlo about any of this, then just type planning into the Q&A box and they will reach out to you. But we'll leave it there. Thank you all for your attention today. And your input in terms of the Q&A, and thanks a lot for your time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.